Hello, everyone. I am the Cursed Speaker. I help you relax and fall asleep with stories and spoken words. Before we begin, like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? Now, just listen and unwind. My family and I went to a cabin in the woods. I wish we never did so. The Harper family, right? Mark, Sarah, and their kids, Alex and Emily, decided they needed a break from the constant buzz of city life. Mark's a high school teacher, you know the type, always has a plan, ready for anything. Sarah's a nurse, the kind of person who's seen it all but still has a heart of gold. Alex, their 15-year-old, is as curious as they come, a real adventurer at heart. And then there's Emily, just 12, smart as a whip but carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. They figured a summer vacation in a secluded cabin in the woods would do them some good. A chance to reconnect, breathe in some fresh air, and maybe, just maybe, enjoy a bit of that peace and quiet you hear so much about, but never really get to experience in the city. The cabin was this charming little thing, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees as far as the eye could see. The kind of place that makes you think of warm fires and cozy nights, but it also had that vibe, like you're the only people in the world, and not entirely in a good way. They settled in quickly, enchanted by the rustic beauty of it all. It was everything they hoped for, until they found the journal in the attic. It was just sitting there, covered in dust, like it was waiting for them. Belonged to someone who stayed there before, filled with notes about the days they spent in the cabin. At first, it was all normal stuff, the kind of things you'd write about when you're enjoying the solitude. But then the entries started to get weird. The person talked about strange noises in the woods at night, shadows that didn't quite line up with anything that should be casting them. They wrote about feeling watched, but every time they looked, there was nothing there. It was like the forest itself had eyes. And then, just as the entries started to dive into something really unnerving, they stopped. Mid-sentence, like the person just dropped the pen and walked away, or ran. The Harpers, well, they tried to laugh it off. Mark, ever the practical one, joked about it being a prank left by the previous renters to spook whoever came next. Sarah, with her intuitive touch, wasn't so sure. She felt a chill run down her spine as she flipped through the pages, but she didn't want to worry the kids. Alex was thrilled, of course. Here was the adventure he'd been looking for, a mystery to solve. Emily, though, she was uneasy. The journal made her anxiety spike, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, just like the person who wrote those entries. But they decided to stay, determined not to let some old journal ruin their vacation. They spent their days exploring the woods, hiking and playing games, trying to soak up every bit of joy they could find in that secluded little spot. And for a while it worked. They laughed and made memories, basking in the glow of the setting sun filtering through the trees. As the days went by, though, things started to feel off. It was little things at first. Sounds in the night, just beyond the edge of the woods, where the shadows seemed a bit too thick. Footprints outside the cabin that didn't match any of their shoes. Objects moving just slightly. Not enough to be sure you weren't imagining it, but enough to make you pause and wonder. Mark did his best to keep everyone calm, coming up with logical explanations for everything. Sarah tried to focus on the beauty of their surroundings, on the healing power of nature. Alex's curiosity turned to obsession, spending hours trying to track whatever was out there. And Emily, she became more withdrawn, spending more and more time inside, her books and puzzles no longer able to distract her from the feeling of dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. One night, things came to a head. They were all sitting around the fire trying to salvage what was left of their vacation with s'mores and stories when the noises started. Not just the usual rustling of leaves or the distant call of an owl, but something closer, more deliberate. Footsteps heavy and slow circling the cabin. They could hear branches snapping, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Mark stood up, a flashlight in one hand, a determined look on his face. "Stay here," he told them, voice steady but tight with worry. Sarah reached out, grabbing his arm. "Be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex jumped to his feet, ready to follow his dad into the dark, but Mark shook his head. "No, Alex. You stay here with your mom and sister. Keep them safe." Emily clung to Sarah, eyes wide with fear as they watched Mark step into the night, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching out, filled with the sounds of their own racing hearts and the unseen creature that lurked just beyond the light of the fire. And then suddenly the noises stopped. The forest went silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, heavy and suffocating. When Mark finally came back, he was alone, his face pale, his hands shaking. "There's nothing out there," he said, but his voice betrayed him, the quiver that he couldn't quite hide. They all huddled together, the fire crackling, the only sound in the otherwise silent night. They didn't sleep much after that, jumping at every little sound, every creak of the cabin settling. By morning, the decision was unspoken but unanimous. It was time to leave. Packing up was a hurried, tense affair, everyone moving with a purpose, eager to put distance between themselves and the cabin. As they drove away, Sarah glanced back, a shiver running down her spine as she thought she saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching them leave. But when she blinked, it was gone. The ride back to the city was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. They spoke little of the cabin in the weeks that followed, the experience hanging over them like a shadow they couldn't shake. It wasn't until much later, when life had returned to some semblance of normalcy, that they could even begin to talk about it. Even then, it was with a sense of disbelief, as if questioning whether it had all been some shared nightmare. But deep down, they knew. They knew that what they had experienced was real, that there was something in the woods that summer, something ancient and watching, waiting, and they were just grateful to have made it out, to have the chance to hold each other a little tighter, to appreciate the safety of their home, their city, where the shadows were just shadows, and the noises in the night were just the sounds of life continuing on. So imagine this. Alex and his family finally get a break from the hustle and bustle of city life. They decide to spend a week in this old rustic cabin tucked away in the woods. Sounds like a dream, right? Well, not exactly. From the get-go, things were just off. The first night, as they're all trying to settle in, the serenity of the woods gets pierced by what sounds like whispers. Soft, unintelligible whispers that seem to dance with the wind. Alex's sister Jenna jokes about it being the wildlife gossiping about the new arrivals. They all laugh it off, but you can tell it's a nervous laugh, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Then there's the stuff inside the cabin. It's like the place has a mind of its own. Books that were neatly stacked on the shelf end up scattered on the floor. And not just randomly dropped, but almost like someone's been flipping through them. Doors slam shut with no draft to blame. 1 minute, you're in a room alone, and the next, you're jumping out of your skin because the door just decided to shut itself. It's enough to make your heart race, but then again, it's an old cabin. "It's just settling," Alex's dad says, trying to brush it off. But the look he exchanges with Alex's mom says they're not entirely convinced. And then there's Alex. He's got this adventurous streak, always wandering off. One day he comes back from one of his walks with this puzzled look on his face. He found something weird, symbols. Not just any symbols, but these bizarre carvings on the trees surrounding the cabin. They're not random. They form a pattern, almost like a barrier. When he shows his family, his mom tries to rationalize it, suggesting maybe previous visitors or even the owner carved them for some sort of game. But Alex isn't so sure. There's something about those symbols that just feels intentional, deliberate. At first, they all try to laugh it off. Maybe it's a witch's curse, Jenna teases, her eyes wide as she wraps a blanket tighter around herself. But as the days go by, the atmosphere in the cabin shifts. What started as a joke becomes a source of tension. The whispers at night grow louder, more insistent. The objects moving, the doors slamming. It all begins to feel less like quirks of an old cabin and more like they're not alone. Arguments start to break out. Alex's dad insists they're letting their imaginations get the best of them, that there's a logical explanation for everything. But Alex and Jenna aren't so sure. The symbols, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, it's all too much. Alex's mom tries to play peacemaker, suggesting maybe they just need to spend a day in town, get away from the cabin for a bit. But it's clear she's unnerved too. The tension is palpable, like a thick fog you can't see through. One night, things come to a head. They're all sitting in the living room trying to enjoy a movie, but the atmosphere is strained. Every little creak, every whisper of wind against the cabin has them on edge. And then out of nowhere, a loud thud from the kitchen. They all jump, hearts racing. Alex's dad, ever the protector, goes to investigate, a flashlight in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other. The rest wait in tense silence, barely breathing. He comes back, looking more puzzled than scared. One of the pans fell off the hook, he says, trying to sound nonchalant. But his voice betrays him, a slight quiver that wasn't there before. They all try to laugh it off, but it's forced, fake. The movie continues to play, but no one's watching anymore. They're all lost in their own thoughts, wondering, questioning. It's not just the physical things anymore. The whispers, the moving objects, the symbols. It's the feeling that settles over the cabin, thick and oppressive. It's the way the shadows seem to move just at the edge of your vision. The way the night feels alive with something unspoken. They start to feel trapped, not just by the walls of the cabin, but by the fear that's slowly creeping into their hearts. The decision to leave or stay becomes a constant debate. Alex wants to leave, convinced there's something wrong with the cabin, something dark. Jenna, though scared, doesn't want to let fear win. Alex's mom is torn, wanting to keep her family safe, but also not wanting to admit that maybe, just maybe, they're dealing with something beyond their understanding. And Alex's dad, he's stubborn, refusing to acknowledge that leaving might be the best option. We're not going to be chased out by some noises and tricks, he asserts, but his conviction is starting to wane. The cabin, with its creaking floors and whispering winds, feels less like a retreat and more like a trap. The family, once excited for a week away from it all, now finds themselves counting the hours, jumping at shadows, and questioning what lurks just beyond the light of their flashlights. The whispers at night grow louder, more insistent, as if whatever's out there is getting bolder, closing in. And that's just the beginning. The real horror hasn't even shown its face yet. But it's there, in the whispers, in the shadows, in the symbols carved into the trees. It's waiting, patient, and the family is slowly but surely falling apart under the weight of their own fear. So what do you think? Would you stay and face whatever's out there, or would you run? Because let me tell you, in a place like that, where the line between the natural and the supernatural blurs, it's not just about what you can see, it's about what you can't. And sometimes the scariest things are those that whisper just beyond the edge of hearing, unseen but felt, in the darkness that surrounds you. So there we were, in this old, creaky cabin that Alex had found online. It's a steal, he said, right by the woods, perfect for a weekend getaway. Mark, Sarah, and I should have known better. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is, right? But there we were, excited for a break from the city, surrounded by nothing but trees that seemed to stretch into the sky forever. The first couple of days were chill. We did the usual stuff, hiking, making s'mores, and telling ghost stories by the fire, not knowing we were about to live one. It was Alex who found the clippings, tucked away in a drawer like they were waiting for us. Old yellowed newspapers with headlines that sent chills down your spine. Local man missing near woods. Unexplained disappearances continue. And sightings of shadow people in the forest. We laughed it off at first. Sounds like the plot of a bad horror movie, Sarah joked. But the laughter died in our throats when we read about the symbols. The same weird symbols we found scratched into the trees around the cabin. That's when the air around us started to feel different, heavier somehow. Mark and Sarah were freaked out, talking about leaving first thing in the morning, but Alex, he was hooked, eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "Don't you guys want to know more about these shadow people?" he asked. But his question hung in the air unanswered. The night felt too dense, too full of whispers that seemed to come from the trees themselves. That's when things started to get really weird. It began with the whispering and footsteps at night. We told ourselves it was just the wind or some animal outside, but deep down we knew it wasn't. The sounds were too deliberate, too close. And then there were the shadows. Not just any shadows. These were different, darker, and they moved. One night we saw them, figures at the edge of the forest, watching us, just standing there. But when we tried to get a closer look, they vanished, poof, like smoke. "This isn't normal," Sarah whispered, voice shaking. "We need to leave." But we didn't, not yet, because that's when things inside the cabin started happening. Personal items went missing, only to be found in places none of us had put them. And then there was the breaking stuff. Glasses shattered on the floor without anyone touching them, and one morning we found the mirror in the bathroom cracked, a web of sharp lines radiating from a point that looked eerily like a fingertip. Mark was the first to crack. "We're not safe here," he said, pacing back and forth. "Those things outside, they're messing with us, and it's only going to get worse." Sarah nodded, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a tight-lipped anxiety. "I hate to say it, but I think Mark's right. We should pack up and go, first light." But Alex, oh man, Alex was in too deep. "We can't just leave," he argued, his eyes burning with an obsession we hadn't seen in him before. "This is our chance to figure out what's really going on, to see something but real." It was like he couldn't see the danger we were in, blinded by his need to uncover the truth about the shadow people. And despite everything, a part of us, maybe the part that loves a good mystery or just can't resist a challenge, wanted to stay too. So we did. That night was the worst. The whispering wasn't just whispering anymore. It was voices, speaking in a language we couldn't understand. The footsteps circled the cabin, a relentless march that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. And the shadows were bolder, coming closer to the windows, pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. We huddled together in the living room, too scared to sleep, jumping at every creak and crack. "What do they want?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't think they're going to stop until they get it." It was Alex who moved first, his decision sparking like flint in his eyes. "I'm going outside," he announced, standing up. "I'm going to confront them." "Are you insane?" Mark hissed, grabbing his arm. "That's exactly what they want. You can't go out there." But Alex shook him off. "I have to. It's the only way to end this." We tried to stop him, we really did, but Alex was determined and there was no changing his mind. We watched, hearts in our throats, as he opened the door and stepped out into the night, a flashlight his only weapon against the darkness. The moments after he left were the longest of our lives. We waited, breaths held, for screams, for sounds of a struggle, for anything. But there was nothing, just the wind in the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. It must have been hours later, or maybe just minutes, when the door creaked open again. We jumped, expecting the worst, but it was Alex. He looked different, though, pale, eyes wide, not with fear, but with wonder. "They're gone," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I saw them, the shadow people. But they didn't hurt me. They just watched, and then they vanished." We didn't sleep that night, or talk much. What was there to say? By morning, the decision was unspoken, but unanimous. We packed up and left, the cabin growing smaller in the rearview mirror, the trees swallowing it up like it was never there. The drive back was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own fears. What had we seen? What had Alex seen? And would we ever really know? We haven't talked about it much since then, that weekend at the cabin. Sometimes it feels like a bad dream, something our minds conjured up. But then I see the look in Alex's eyes when he stares off into the distance, and I know it was real. So, yeah, that's our story. Make of it what you will. But if you ever find yourself near those woods, or any woods that seem a little too quiet, a little too watchful, maybe just keep driving, because some mysteries, some shadows are better left alone. So picture this. Mark and his family had just moved into this old creaky house on the edge of a dense, sprawling forest. The kind of place that's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. They thought it was a fresh start, away from the city's chaos. Little did they know, they were stepping into a nightmare. Almost immediately, weird stuff started happening. Shadows that moved on their own. Whispers in the wind that seemed a little too close, a little too human. But Mark, being the rational guy he was, chalked it up to the house settling in, or the wind playing tricks. That was until the night they saw the figures at the tree line. It wasn't just one or two. No, it was like a congregation of shadows just standing there watching the house. Mark's wife Jenna was the first to see them. She swore they were calling out to her, but Mark couldn't hear a thing. He told her it was stress. The move had been hard on all of them, but deep down, he felt it too. Something wasn't right. Days went by, and the presence of those figures grew more oppressive. It was like you could feel their eyes on you no matter where you were in the house. Their daughter Lucy wouldn't even go near the windows after dusk. She said they wanted to take her away. That's when Mark knew he couldn't ignore this any longer. One night, fed up and desperate to protect his family, Mark decided to confront whatever was out there. He told Jenna to lock everything up tight and not to open the door for anyone but him. Grabbing a flashlight and a baseball bat, because let's face it, what else are you going to do? He stepped out into the night. The air was thick, almost suffocating. As he approached the tree line, the flashlight's beam seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness. Every step felt heavier, like the forest itself was trying to keep him out. And the sounds, man, it was like the whole forest was whispering, warning him to turn back. But Mark pressed on. He had to know. He had to protect his family. That's when he saw them, clearer now in the moonlight. They weren't just shadows. They were wrong. Twisted forms that looked human but moved in ways that made his stomach turn. And their eyes. Their eyes were the worst part. They glowed with a hunger, a malice that was directed right at him. Mark demanded they leave his family alone, swinging the bat through the air to make his point. But they just stood there watching, whispering among themselves. That's when the air shifted, and one of them stepped forward. Its voice was like gravel being ground together. "You do not belong," it hissed. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "This is my home," he shot back, trying to sound braver than he felt. The entity chuckled, a sound that seemed to come from all around him. "You have disturbed the sacred. The curse binds us to protect. You are invaders." The words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. Curse? Sacred? What were they talking about? That's when the realization dawned on him. The previous owner had mentioned something about the land being part of an old settlement, something about traditions and respecting the forest. Mark had brushed it off as local superstition, but now... "You mean this is because we cut down those trees to clear the backyard?" Mark's voice was barely a whisper, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The entity nodded, its form shimmering in the moonlight. "The forest is sacred. Those who harm it harm themselves. You have unleashed the curse." Panic set in. Mark thought about his wife, his daughter, back in the house. What had he done? "How do we stop it? Please, we didn't know." The entity regarded him for a moment, and Mark could swear there was a hint of pity in those glowing eyes. "Restore what was taken. Respect the land. Only then will the curse be lifted." With that, the figures began to fade, melting back into the shadows of the forest. Mark was left standing there, heart pounding, his mind racing. He ran back to the house, bursting through the door. Jenna was there, holding Lucy, both of them wide-eyed with fear. "We have to fix this," Mark gasped, trying to catch his breath. "We need to plant new trees, make things right with the forest." Jenna nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Okay, we'll do it. First thing in the morning." They spent the next few days planting new trees, tending to the land with a newfound respect. It was hard work, but as they did, the atmosphere began to change. The oppressive feeling lifted and the shadows at the tree line seemed to recede. Weeks went by, and the forest seemed to accept their efforts. The whispers in the wind died down, and Lucy could play near the windows again without fear. They never saw the entities again, but Mark and his family knew they were still there, watching, protecting the forest. And so, they lived on, in harmony with the land. Mark never forgot the lesson they learned, the importance of respecting the natural world. The curse had been a terrifying experience, but it had opened their eyes to the delicate balance between humans and nature. So next time you think about messing with nature, remember Mark's story. Some things are better left untouched, and some places demand respect. You never know what's watching from the shadows, waiting to protect its sacred ground. So there we were, the Harper family, huddled together in our old beat-up car, hearts pounding like we'd just run a marathon. You see, we'd decided to take a fun family road trip to some off-the-beaten-path places. Big mistake. Huge. We ended up in this tiny, creepy town that wasn't even on the map. It felt like we'd stepped into a horror movie, and let me tell you, getting out wasn't easy. The night before we planned to leave, everything went south. Our cozy little inn turned into a scene straight out of a nightmare. Shadows moved on their own, whispers filled the air, and that cold feeling of being watched. Yeah, it was constant. We decided to bail at first light, not even bothering to pack properly. We just threw our stuff into the car and got ready to hit the road. But of course, the car wouldn't start. Typical, right? It was like the town didn't want to let us go. Dad tried everything, from checking the engine to practically begging the car to start, but nothing worked. We were stuck until the sun came up, and let me tell you, those were the longest hours of our lives. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? Every noise made us jump, and every shadow seemed to hide something sinister. Mom kept checking her watch, counting down the minutes until dawn, like it was our lifeline. And in a way, it was. Because as soon as that first sliver of light crept over the horizon, the car roared to life like nothing was ever wrong with it. We didn't waste a second. Dad floored it, and we left that nightmare town in the dust. The relief was palpable. We laughed, cried, and promised each other we'd never, ever do anything like that again. We were going back to civilization, to normalcy, or so we thought. The drive back was silent. Each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had happened. It felt surreal, like waking up from a bad dream, except the relief of waking up never came. We were all too eager to get home, take a long shower, and maybe try to forget the whole ordeal. But you know how these stories go, right? It's never that easy. We got home late in the afternoon, the house welcoming us back like an old friend. Everything seemed to be just as we left it, comforting in its familiarity. We unpacked, ordered some pizza, and tried to laugh off the last couple of days. But there was this unspoken tension in the air, like we were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it did. It was Emily who noticed it first. She was about to close the curtains in her room when she let out this sharp gasp. We all rushed in, asking what was wrong, and she just pointed to the window. There, etched into the glass, was a small symbol. It looked like something out of a cult horror flick, all sharp angles and ominous vibes. The blood drained from our faces. This couldn't be happening. We were home, safe, weren't we? Dad tried to play it off, saying it was probably some kids playing a prank, but we could all hear the uncertainty in his voice. Mom suggested we clean it off and try to forget about it, but the symbol wouldn't budge, no matter how hard we scrubbed. That night, no one slept well. Every creak and groan of the house had us on edge, half expecting to be plunged back into the nightmare we thought we'd escaped. Morning couldn't come soon enough. So here we are, trying to move on, but it's hard. That symbol on Emily's window is like a constant reminder that maybe, just maybe, our ordeal isn't over. We don't talk about what happened. Not really. It's like if we don't acknowledge it, it might just go away. But deep down, we all know it's not that simple. We're trying to get back to normal, but there's always that nagging feeling in the back of our minds. What if that symbol wasn't just a random act of vandalism, What if it was a sign, a warning, or worse, a claim? I wish I could tell you that we found a way to erase the symbol, to erase the fear that came with it. But life isn't like the movies. There's no magic solution, no team of Ghostbusters to call. It's just us, the Harpers, trying to stick together and hope that whatever followed us home decides to leave us alone. So yeah, that's our story. Not exactly the fun family road trip we had in mind. If there's a moral here, it's probably to stick to the beaten path or at least do a little more research before you decide to explore unknown towns. Oh, and maybe invest in a more reliable car. But hey, who knows? Maybe one day we'll look back on this and laugh, or maybe we'll be too busy dealing with whatever comes next. Only time will tell. For now, we're just taking it one day at a time, keeping our eyes open for anything out of the ordinary. Because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that the world is a lot stranger and scarier than we ever imagined.